Well, today our word picture is a trail or a path maybe, or a wilderness, or maybe a garden, or maybe a garden path. Maybe we'll just say that. A garden path in a wilderness might be the best way to put it, because there are lots of images embedded into one passage of Scripture, and it's in Isaiah chapter 35. Isaiah 35. So a few years ago, it was up in the north woods of Wisconsin. It was snowing like crazy on this particular day. Snow was just piling down. And I was really glad I was warm and inside my office. And then the phone rang. And Kathy was on the line. She goes, "Honey, could you help me out?" And I said, "Well, what's up?" And she says, "Well, I'm over at the dentist's office, and I have a flat tire, and I'm just wondering if you could come and help me out." And I said, "Sure, sweetheart, I'll be glad to take care of that for you." And so then after we hung up, I did what any good husband would do. I called AAA. Hey, that's what we pay it for, right? We pay AAA. So I called the guy, and they said, "We'll be right over." But then I thought, I'd probably better get over there. And so I drove over anyway in the snow, and I made my way slipping and sliding to the dentist's office. And there she was outside by the minivan with a flat tire. And I said, "Honey, would you like for me to stay here and wait for the AAA tow truck driver, and you take my car and you go do whatever you need to do?" "Oh, that'd be great," she said. "You're a dear." She gets me off she goes. And here I am standing by her minivan with the flat tire, and the AAA guy shows up. He's a big, buff, burly guy. And boy, I'm sure glad he's the one that changed that tire. It would have taken me like 2 hours, twisting lug nuts and stuff. He had like automatic tools, just like that. In like 10 minutes, he got the whole thing done. It was great. So I shook his hand and signed the papers and stuff. And then it was time to go. And it's still snowing. And I got in the car and I got ready to go. And then I made a terrible mistake. You see, because there was so much snow on the ground, I couldn't really see, like where things were, like the entrances and stuff like that. And so I went out and I turned right on what I thought was the road, but it wasn't really the road. I realized it wasn't when I saw these teeny tiny little signs. And up in the North Woods, when you see these signs, that that's a snowmobile trail. It's not a road, it's a snowmobile trail. I was actually driving on a snowmobile trail. Snowmobile trails are not made for cars. They're made for snowmobiles. And up there in the North Woods, they have this little maze of snowmobile trails all over the place. And you can get just about anywhere on a snowmobile, following the snowmobile trails, even to the dentist. I have no idea who would go to the dentist on a snowmobile, but they did. And so here I am now, leaving the dentist parking lot, driving on a snowmobile trail, and I'm like, oh no, I'm gonna get stuck. So I better floor it. So I just and snow's like flying like crazy. And I look in my rearview mirror, and the AAA tow truck driver's right behind me. He's on the snowmobile trail too. It was about 50 yards to the actual road. And I made it. I couldn't believe I made it. The AAA guy didn't make it. He didn't make it. He went all the way down to the axles, the poor guy. I mean, here he was, stuck as could be. Oh, I felt so bad for him. And so I got out of my car and I waded through the snow back to where he was. I knocked on his window. I was, "Excuse me, can I help you out in some way or another?" Like me helping the AAA tow truck driver. What am I going to do? You want me to call AAA or something? That won't work. He wasn't a happy camper. There was a philosopher named M. Scott Peck who wrote a book about 30 years ago called The Road Less Traveled. I don't know if anybody's read that book or not. Anyway, here's something that Peck said. It was the first 3 words of his book. It was the theme of his entire book. Life is difficult. Life is difficult. And he said, if you can wrap your mind around that, if you can embrace the fact that life is difficult, then it won't be so difficult. But if you expect that life isn't difficult, then every time life is difficult, you'll protest against that. And so life is always even more difficult because you think it shouldn't be. That's the point of his book. Life's hard. You better just embrace it. And so if I take like Peck, and then I think about my experience of driving on the snowmobile trail, and I blend those two together, I would say something like this. That life is like driving in the winter in Wisconsin. It's difficult. We're going to be doing that next Sunday, by the way, driving in the winter in Wisconsin. But life without Jesus is like driving on a snowmobile trail in the winter in Wisconsin. It's virtually impossible. It's a whole lot harder. Yeah, life is hard for people who follow Jesus. But it's a whole lot harder when we try to live our life in a way that we weren't created to live it. That's the point. And if you take the snow and you turn it into sand, and if you change the location from northern Wisconsin to a Palestinian wilderness, the desert, that's what we find right here in Isaiah chapter 35. Now, I'm going to read the whole chapter to you, and then we'll unpack it. All right? Can we do that? Here's what it says. The desert and the parched land will be glad. The wilderness will rejoice and blossom. Like the crocus, it will burst into bloom. It will rejoice greatly. It will shout for joy. The glory of Lebanon will be given to it, and the splendor of Carmel and Sharon. They will see the glory of the Lord, the splendor of our God. By the way, Lebanon, Carmel, Sharon, all three of these were just known throughout the ancient world as this beautiful, lush, wonderful place, like the mountains that are springing with fertile flowers and stuff like that. And so just like that's what the way the desert's going to be for you. So strengthen your feeble hands. Steady the knees that give way. Say to those with fearful hearts, be strong and do not fear. Your God will come. He will come with a vengeance, with divine retribution. He will come to save you. And then will the eyes of the blind be opened, and the ears of the deaf unstopped. And then will the lame leap like a deer, and the mute tongue shall shout for joy. And water will gush forth in the wilderness, and streams in the desert. And the burning sand will become a pool, and the thirsty ground bubbling springs. And in the haunts where jackals once lay, grass and reeds and papyrus will grow. And a highway will be there, and it will be called the way of holiness. And it will be for those who walk on that way. And the unclean will not journey on it. Wicked fools will not go about on it. No lion will be there. Sorry, Detroit fans, no lions are there, it says. No any ravenous beast, they will not be there. But only the redeemed will walk there, and those the Lord has rescued, they shall return. And they will enter Zion with singing, and everlasting joy will crown their heads, and gladness and joy will overtake them, and sorrow and sighing shall flee away. Oh, what a wonderful passage. But it starts with a desert. It starts with a wilderness. Now, when I imagine the word wilderness, when I think the word wilderness, I picture a trail in the forest. I picture waterfalls. I picture mountain streams and beautiful brooks and pine trees. That's what I picture when I think of wilderness. But the biblical wilderness wasn't anything like that. It's a different kind of wilderness. It's a parched land. It's oppressive. It's harsh, the biblical wilderness. Kathy and I experienced that a couple of years ago. We ended up in Israel. We took a trip there, and we ended up on a wilderness excursion. There were these Bedouin that had a company that took people on Jeep rides deep, deep into the Judean wilderness. And so we did it. We jammed into Jeeps. It was 114 degrees and no shade. And my Jeep didn't have air conditioning. And the window wouldn't go down on my side. And we're all jammed up into these Jeeps. And I thought already we were in the wilderness, but there was another wilderness, like what we were in, which I thought was this incredible, horrible desert wilderness. That was just the edge of the wilderness. And so he took us about like half hour, 45 minutes, deep, deep, deep into the wilderness, through wadis and ravines with big potholes and stuff, off-roading. I'd never thought I'd go off-roading with a Bedouin in the wilderness over in Bible lands. And we made our way all the way to the top of the sand dune, this big crest of a hill where everything around us is sand. And I looked around, and as far as you could see, all the way around, a whole panorama of sand with only one tree. One tree. It was only just about as far from here to that Christmas tree. It was like a Charlie Brown tree. Just one little scrawny tree. I have no idea how it got there or how it survived, but there it was. And it had just a teeny little patch of shade, and there were about 20 of us people, and we all saw that tree, and we all ran to the tree to get into the shade, and we're like jostling each other trying to get into the shade of that one tree, because it's 114 and no breeze. I mean, it was so hot. It was just miserably hot. I'd never experienced such hotness in all my life. And then a swarm of flies came. I don't know where the flies came from. I don't know where they lived. I have no clue. I mean, there was not one bit of life you could see anywhere, but these flies were alive, and they found us. They swarmed upon us. They saw us, and they went, food! Water, sweat, yes, boom, and they just swarmed all over us. And we're like, plagued by flies in this wilderness. It was awful. It was awful. And our guide decided that this would be a good idea right now to give a half-hour lecture on the biblical wilderness. We did not need a lecture. We knew exactly what the biblical wilderness was like. We were experiencing it firsthand. And that's the kind of wilderness that Isaiah chapter 35 is talking about. That's the kind of wilderness. The desert and the parched land, it says. But it's going to get good. But right now it's not. It's hot. It's flies. It's 114 degrees, and you can't find any shade. That kind of wilderness. You see, in the Bible, the wilderness is a humbling place, and it's a testing place. We see it throughout all the pages of Scripture that was the image of the wilderness. Like Jesus, for instance, he was baptized and then he immediately went out into the wilderness for 40 days to be tested. The Apostle Paul, he goes into the wilderness after his conversion, so he's tested. The children of Israel, they wandered 40 years in the wilderness being tested. Deuteronomy 8, 2 and 3, it says, remember how the Lord your God led you all the way in the wilderness these 40 years to humble you and to test you in order to know what was in your heart. Wilderness is a humbling place. Wilderness is a testing place. You know why it took them 40 years? They didn't stop and ask for directions. That's why maybe. No, you know why it took 40 years? It took them 40 years because they kept flunking the test. They kept failing the test. And whenever you're in a wilderness and you have a test and you fail the test, then he's going to make you take the test all over again. That's the way it works. And so they kept failing the test for 40 years. It's a humbling place. It's a testing place. See, the thing about the humbling in the wilderness, you can't keep your dignity there. Like when we were hunkering down under the shade tree, the Charlie Brown tree, there was not one person in our group who remained dignified. Not one. We lost all of our dignity. We just wanted to survive. That's the way it works when you're in a wilderness. You lose your dignity. Kind of like when I took my friend Bob McIntyre canoeing one time. Bob was the general superintendent of the Wesleyan Church for many years. He was the head of the National Association of Evangelicals. He was friends with at least 2 or 3 presidents. I mean, he just was a great world leader. And he told me one day, he said, I'll preach at your church for free if you take me canoeing down the Namakagon River. It was a scenic wilderness, the good kind of wilderness riverway. And so I said, absolutely, I'd love to have you preach in my church. Good thing I had him preach on Sunday, and we went canoeing on Monday because we had a horrible experience in the canoeing. I think he would have gone home after if we would have canoed on Saturday. I wouldn't have had him on Sunday. So he's like 85 years old by this time. And so Bob's in the front of the canoe and I'm in the back, and somehow I didn't steer it quite right, and we end up hitting a tree, and we flipped upside down, and there we went underneath the water, and the canoe got stuck underneath the tree, and I don't know how we did it exactly, but both Bob and I, we ended up climbing on top of the tree, and we were straddling the tree like this. And now Bob had on this Dr. McIntyre had on this Gilligan's Island kind of hat and a goofy looking outfit, and he was drenched, just as a wet puppy he was. And there he was on this, and the only way we could get to the shore was to actually like hop on our rear end, just kind of hump, 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 like this to get to the shore. And Dr. Bob McIntyre, friend of presidents and the head of the National Association of Evangelicals and all that, and there he is in front of me, just hopping along on the tree. It was the funniest sight you'd ever see. He turns around and he says to me, I don't believe anybody has ever seen me in such an undignified position. Well, that's a humbling place. By the way, his grandson is the pastor of my church up in Wisconsin. He followed me there, so he's there now. So see, good things can still come out of an experience like that. It's a humbling place, and it's a testing place too. The wilderness is where we get tested. When we feel like we're wandering in this dry, barren spot in life, we get tested. This is something Kathy said to me about college, by the way, just recently. We were talking about how students face the pressures of college. And I heard a guy talk to some of my students this last semester, and he said to them, now, you guys, you don't know what pressure is. You're going to find real pressure when you get out into the real world. But I've seen the pressure these guys are under. They're under a lot of pressure when they're in college. It's just a different kind of pressure. And what Kathy said was, when you're in college, what happens is whatever your lifelong issues are, they're going to pop out in college because there's pressure that happens, and it's like a hose that has a little leak in it. It's going to squirt out at college. It'll pop out. So whatever your thing is that's going to be happening in your life, it's going to show up there, and you might as well deal with it up front rather than wait till later on, till you're like 50 years old or something. What a good thing that we have an opportunity to patch up those leaks right now rather than to wait till later. See, this is a testing place. And the wilderness, there are 4 tests that we get to take in the wilderness. 4 different tests that we experience in the wilderness. The first one is the obedience test. And the question there is, am I going to do things God's way or my way? Now, sometimes it works great because my way is God's way, and that's wonderful. They're all lined up, and then I get to have my way, and God gets his way too. But the question is, what happens if what God wants and what I want are 2 different things? Which one am I going to take then? That's the obedience test. The second test is the character test. The character test. And the question there is, am I going to do the right thing even if it hurts me? Even if it's inconvenient for me? Am I going to do what's right, even if it doesn't feel like it's in my best interest? That's the character test. The third test is the motive test. And the motive test is, am I acting out of love or am I acting out of fear? And as I look back on my life, I pretty much regret most of the decisions I've made out of fear, well, except for running from snakes. But other than that, the decisions that I made out of fear, I regret those. And decisions I've made out of love, I've never regretted any one of those. And the spirit test, that's the fourth one, the spirit test. And the spirit test, the question here is, am I grateful in my attitude, or am I murmuring and complaining? Am I grateful, or am I murmuring? You know what murmuring is? It's like, it's like when you go, that's murmuring. Which one? And so Isaiah takes this kind of a wilderness, this parched, humbling, hard, testing wilderness, and he flips it upside down. He turns it inside out. He takes the word picture of a wilderness and he turns it into a garden path. Now that's just the most astounding thing. What it says is there's hope for change, that change is possible, that transformation can happen, and we have a longing for that. We all know that this is something that could be, and I think that longing, that change can happen, that transformation is possible. I think that longing is the reason why Christmas carols start being played around October these days. Have you noticed that? Like earlier and earlier, we hear Christmas songs, and it isn't just crass commercialism. There's a human longing for the world to be right, and it doesn't feel right. But somehow Christmas helps us to say, okay, maybe it can be right. Like, what's your favorite Christmas movie? Think about your very favorite Christmas movie, the one that you like the best. Whichever one it is, I'll bet you, because almost every Christmas movie has this as a theme. There's this longing for transformation and that something's going to change and something that's wrong is made right. And that's the reason why, and I know, I admit it, I like Hallmark movies. I know they're mushy, they're sentimental, they're like touch. And it's the same thing over and over and over and over again. But here it is, right? Something's bad, something goes wrong. You have hope, and then it messes up, and then it gets worse, and then it gets better, and it all gets great at the end, and they all get married. They live happily ever after. And oh man, I love that. Well, that's what Isaiah 35 says. That's what it says. That it will be made right. A garden path right in the midst of this parched desert land. It turns the corner. It becomes something new. Remember, Isaiah is a prophet, and that means he's a poet. And the poets, they think in pictures, and he puts these word pictures, and they help us to capture the idea, the concept. And even in the form of the poetry, you see it. Now, this is pretty cool. I want you to pretend like you're an Old Testament student of mine now, all right? So this is a lesson that I taught in my Old Testament class. It's about Hebrew poetry, and it's called the chiastic structure. And so throughout, like Isaiah, Psalms, even Jesus used it. You see the chiastic structure, and it's a way of getting the point across in a Hebrew poetic kind of fashion. And so let me explain. Here's the idea. It goes A to B to C, sometimes even D. C is repeated, and then you go back to B, and then you go back to A. So it's A, B, C, C, B, A. So I tried to illustrate this for my students, and so I wrote chiastic structure right on the spot. I wrote this one. It was a chiastic poem about social media. And it goes like this. A, social media ranting. B, wastes time. Right? Isn't it true? Huh? Big sign. Okay. C, makes enemies. Pretty much. Social media ranting, A, wastes time. B, makes enemies. C. To make friends, C, and redeem the time, B, post social media blessings. You get it? So A is rantings, blessings. B is enemies, friends. C, waste time. No, yeah, yeah. You know what I'm saying? Yeah, yeah, you know what I'm saying? Yeah, you got it. Okay, yeah. C, what was C? Oh, yeah, make friends, enemies. That's here. Yeah, you got it. You know what I mean? Okay, here we go. So Isaiah 35 is that structure. It's a chiastic structure, and it's pretty cool. So it starts with this really harsh, desolate wilderness, the parched land, the desolate wilderness. That's A. And then we go to B. And B is about broken people, broken humanity. It says feeble hands. It says strengthen your feeble hands, steady your knees, and say to those with fearful hearts, be strong. So feeble hands, shaking knees, fearful hearts. You see, this is that broken humanity. The feeble hands, that's like just being exhausted, just feeling exhausted and drained. You're just totally worn out. Feeble hands. Shaky knees. That's like when you're afraid of what's going to happen tomorrow and you're really worried about the way things are going to turn out. And then fearful hearts. The actual Hebrew word there is racing hearts. It's like when things get really ramped up. Do you ever have trouble with that with your thinking? All of a sudden everything just goes really fast and you're, what am I going to do? You get all worked up and all ramped up with everything. That's broken humanity. So we have this desolate wilderness, that's A, and broken humanity with the feeble hands and the shaky knees and the racing hearts, that's broken, that's B. And then C, God comes. God comes. He shows up. And everything that we find right here, the whole point of Isaiah 35 is smack dab in the middle. This is where it is. It's in the C. The C is where it happens, right here. This is where everything flips around. C, God shows up. Look at verse 4. It says, be strong. Don't fear. Your God will come. He'll come with a vengeance. With divine retribution. He'll come to save you. You see, he's coming to rescue you. No, I mean, it says vengeance, divine retribution. Those are pretty hard words, but really what it's saying is God's on your side and he's here to help you out. And you've been really falling and struggling and all that. He's coming on a redemption mission. He's coming to rescue you. He's coming to bring you the victory. That's what it's saying. That's what it's saying. In other words, you better watch out. Jesus is coming to town, right? Jesus is coming to town. Oh, what a cool thing that he's coming. He's coming. We need to be reminded that he's coming. Sometimes we get stuck in the A or the B. We forget that he has a different word for the situation with whatever it is we're going through. John the Baptist experienced that. He was the voice in the wilderness. He was the one that said, prepare the way of the Lord. John the Baptist did that. He was the one that came before Jesus. But then things happened and he got arrested and bad stuff happened to him. He ends up in jail and he sends a message. He gets discouraged and defeated. Even though he knows Jesus, he's still, in fact, this happens to people who know God. It doesn't mean it's all peaches and cream. Sometimes you know God and it still gets hard. And life is hard, remember? And John says, are you really the one or should I be looking for somebody else? He sends the message to Jesus. And Jesus sends a message back, and what he says is, just tell John, the lame are walking, and the deaf people are hearing, and the blind people can see. Just tell him that. Just tell him that. It's happening. It's happening, John. You're fulfilling your mission, John. You're fulfilling, even though you're in a bad spot right now, the mission's being fulfilled. It doesn't say exactly how John responded to that, but I'll bet you anything that gave him hope, it gave him encouragement, it gave him help, even when he was in a hard place. So, because when we see God showing up, it changes everything. And then we go back to the B, right? And what we find is a rejoicing humanity. We find people who are just rejoicing. It says, let's see, where are we? Hang on, I got it right here. Yeah, water will gush forth in the wilderness, streams in the desert. The burning sands become pools. Thirsty ground becomes bubbling water. The eyes of the blind are open. The ears of the deaf are unstopped. The lame leap like a deer. The mute shout songs of joy. We have rejoicing. There's B, you see? So we go from broken humanity to rejoicing humanity. And then as we're rejoicing, we go back to the wilderness, and the wilderness becomes a singing wilderness. A singing wilderness. The flowers begin to bloom. He says, I will make a way in the wilderness. I'm giving you a way. A highway will be there, and it will be called the highway of holiness. And actually, in the Hebrew, the word way doesn't just show up 2 times. It's translated in some passages with 3 ways, and some versions only have 2. Mine only has 2, but really there are 3. So basically what it says is, there's a highway there, a way. It will be called the way of holiness. So a way. There's a way through it. If you're in a dry, barren land, if you feel like you're just wandering around, you feel lost and you can't find your bearings, there's a way. And Jesus said, I am the way. I'm the truth and I'm the life. You just follow me. And then you got the path. And it isn't necessarily a path out of it, but it's a path through it. It's a path right on the middle through it. So you can sing right on the path all the way through. You can enter Zion with singing, and everlasting joy will crown your heads. Gladness and joy will overtake you. Sorrow and sighing will flee away. Gladness and joy overtake you. Do you get that? What it means is you don't have to chase happiness. You don't have to run after it trying to find it. In fact, if you go try to find it, you won't find it. But let it chase you. Let it find you. But what we have to do is stop and listen and look and listen. Hear the voice of God. Listen for the C. And that'll help you turn the first A into a second A, right? It'll turn your first B into a second B. That's what it'll do for you. The wilderness becomes a singing wilderness. One of my favorite writers, Sigurd Olson, he's a nature writer. I love his stuff. He built a cabin way up in the northern part of Minnesota, and it was called Listening Point. He just named it that, Listening Point, out in the middle of nowhere, no cell reception or anything, remote listening point. And what he said was this: I named it Listening Point because only when one comes to listen, only when one is aware and still, can things be seen and heard. And everyone has a listening point somewhere. It doesn't have to be in the north or close to the wilderness, but someplace quiet where the universe can be contemplated with awe. And if you feel like you're in this desert place, it's trying to say something to you. Listen for the voice of God. Listen to what God wants to say to you. Make it a listening point, and He'll speak His grace to your heart. And I'm going to finish up with one more thought. This is a poem that I wrote. See, I don't get to share my poems very often. I haven't written very many of them, but I figured, hey, I've got a captive audience. Might as well, right? I think this little poem captures the idea of what I'm trying to say, that you press on through, that there's a way in the wilderness, that hope is on the way. It's called The Seed of Heaven. Faith, the seed of heaven, planted by surprise in earthen soil. The barren ground reluctantly invites, mostly disdains the small possibility of hope. Stirs slightly, irritated, yawns, and then settles back in lazy slumber, mostly convinced that the interruption is merely the burial of another empty dream. Entombed in heavy darkness, the seed of heaven sings as it reaches for a land beyond its grasp and hopes for the hand of God it cannot see. But no place can silence the song of faith and hope, and calloused soil cannot withstand for long refreshing rain. Slowly, steadily, the seed of heaven toils upward, onward, through the dark, towards heaven's gate. Sometimes singing, sometimes sighing, always longing, for destiny awaits. Heaven beckons, earth responds, That is the order of all created things. The earthen tomb becomes a womb of life anew and resurrection, a seed, a sprout, a stalk, and then a splendid crimson flower blooming where it first began its morning hour, looking up to see the smile of God, and looking down upon the sordid place from which it came, and bearing precious treasure, another measure of the seed of heaven, faith.